Did you know that there are more than two political parties represented in Congress? Not talking state level, I'm talking on the federal level. Yeah, Marxists have been successful, more successful than you realize, in subverting our political system and subverting elections to get their people in. And they've been very successful in that of shifting things. We need to talk a little bit about this. Welcome to the Enemies Within the Church podcast. You can go to enemieswithinthechurch.com if you haven't viewed the documentary. If you have, you can go ahead and buy multiple copies, buy a bunch of copies, hand them out. You can also go to EWTCnews.com. That stands for Enemies Within the Church News. EWTCnews.com to view the continued project of Enemies Within the Church, which this podcast is a part of that. Now, what did I start off with? Yeah, we're talking about the ways that Marxists have infiltrated, have subverted the standard two-party system, which shouldn't be standard. Oh my goodness, there's problems with that. But the way they've subverted that in order to get their people in place and then to start to radically pull things in their direction. Now, we're not going to be talking about the long history here, because you can go back basically since the beginnings of Marxism and find things happening. And there's a lot of fascinating and underappreciated, understudied, undertalked about history there. We're going to be covering parts of that over time. But right now, we're talking in a more modern context, and very much in particular, the last 8-ish, 9-ish, 10-ish years. So really over the last decade, how have they been as successful as they have been? How have they been to the point where there are third parties represented, or at least specifically a third party represented in Congress? That's a big deal. But it's not something that people realize even exists. Check yourself. Did you know that there is a third party in Congress? Did you know that? But the reality is that, yeah, there is. It's fascinating. Now, one thing before we really jump into it, we're also going to be going over something else towards the end. We're going to be talking a little bit about lessons from a state constitution that is fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and destroys a lot of woke nonsense. And you're going to be pretty impressed, pretty fascinated by which state constitution this is that really just stomps on a lot of the narratives, a lot of the laws, a lot of the different things that woke people are trying to push, and liberals in general were trying to push for a long time and have gotten away with, despite the illegitimacy of them. It's really interesting. But if this episode is helpful, if this podcast has been helpful, again, please consider doing things like liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting on it. Whatever you can, rate it, whatever you're getting this on, whether it's on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iTunes, or any one of the many, many podcast platforms we're on. If it's useful, give us some feedback about that and consider sharing it. If it isn't useful, well, we'd like to hear why you think it isn't useful, but please give an insightful comment, something that is tangible. We can vet it, go, hey, here's the facts that you presented. Do these line up with reality? Far too often people just drop an insult. Okay, you want to do that? That's your prerogative, but that doesn't help anyone. We like information. We like you to have information. If you disagree with us, you better have actually looked at the reasons why. Now, what am I talking about? What is the third party that's represented in Congress? Let's add a little context. How much representation is there? Currently, they have 4 members of the House of Representatives, And then they don't officially have a senator, but they do have a senator. I think by all, for all intents and purposes, they do have a senator. So we're going to say a senator and 4 representatives. So that's actually, again, that's a big deal. Now, why do you not know about this? Why haven't you heard of there being a third party, and specifically a Marxist party, an openly Marxist party represented? Now, I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're not surprised at all to hear that there are Marxists, people who believe in Marxist ideas, in Congress. Yeah, I doubt that surprises you at all, but members of a Marxist party. So what's the party we're talking about? We're talking about the Democratic Socialists of America, which we could probably do an entire episode just talking about the Democratic Socialists of America. In fact, we might be looking a little bit more at them at some other points. But the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, one piece of context I want to give is that they, like all of these parties, are rebranding, a merger of 2 different parties and a rebranding over time. Specifically, the rebranding was to include Democratic. It's very hard to sell socialism, or historically was very hard to sell socialism in the United States. So there are a lot of different terms pulled in to try and make it more palatable. Yeah, that's a trend that happened around the world. I just find the term democratic socialism so funny for multiple different reasons. But so why have you not heard that there are DSA members, Democratic Socialists of America members in Congress? Well, it's because they do something that is very smart and something we as conservatives should learn from. There are a lot of bad tactics that we shouldn't take up, but there are some good tactics that we should examine and go, hey, what is the legitimate tactic here that we can use? The reason they get away with it is they run their candidates under the Democrat ticket. I mean, that's the simple thing of it. They just run their candidates as Democrats, intentionally so. It's not like a sort of, oh, well, we can't win on our own, so we're going to kind of like compromise our. No, it's for the purpose of subversion. For the purpose of subversion. Before we go any further, we should probably identify who these people are. We'll talk about the senator. He's going to get his own little highlight in this episode, but these names are not going to surprise you, and it's going to make a lot of sense. There's a name, at least a guess, if you didn't already know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. She's a member. Rashida Tlaib. Why can I never pronounce her last name? Cori Bush. And they have a 4th member, although he was not endorsed in his run, but he is a member, an actual member, not just a subscriber of the ideology, but an actual member of DSA, of Greg Cesar. And they've had other members. Those are the 4 they currently have. They have one that they, I believe, kicked out. Now, they also have 12 members. And these numbers are because people will change political alliances. People will, there'll be different circumstances that happen. Best count I can grab, these are the correct current numbers. They have 12 members in state senates and 42 members in state House of Representatives, or I guess some states use different terminology, but 12 members in state upper houses, 42 members in state lower houses. Those are not insignificant. They're also not gigantic numbers, but they're not insignificant. The fact that they, unlike some of there are other third parties represented in states. Not to the degree, especially for the size of the party, not to the degree that the DSA are, and not with the wide spread nature of the DSA. Because we're not talking about something like the Vermont Progressive Party, another socialist Marxist party. We'll talk about them a tiny bit too, but they're only in Vermont. And there's a few other state ones, and then there's other third parties like the Libertarians, the largest, quote, largest third party. Excuse me. But it's just fascinating how wide the DSA are. Now, one of the other reasons that you probably haven't heard of the DSA is, though they are a political party for all intents and purposes, they're treated in most respects, in most places, they're just openly called a political party. They're represented as a political party. Because of the nature of how they run, they're not, it's sort of in a quasi state, because again, they run their candidates on the Democratic ticket. They do that, again, intentionally. Their plan is to grow by subverting the Democrat base. And there's multiple ways that they do this. But I want to right now introduce the idea that they're on the right track. Not with their ideology, but with their tactic of going into the party to try and reform it to fit their ideology. We as conservatives, let's be honest about a few things. Let's be honest. We all have different opinions in regards to this, but let's at least be honest with the fact that the Republican Party is not truly a conservative party. It is much more of a big tent, much more of a centrist to, kind of a moderate to conservative party, catch-all for anything that's on the right to the moderate left. It's full of classical liberals. It's where the classical liberals went when they started to leave the Democrats, as the Democrats went more and more progressive, as things went more and more radically to the left. And why could they do that? Because, well, classical liberals already had a home in the Republican Party. They really always had, in the form of the neocons, or what we would now call neocons. Obviously, they weren't called that decades and decades and decades ago, but a little bit more of a modern term. But there's always been an arm. It's never been a truly conservative party, especially when you look at the origins of the parties and how the two parties were kind of structured up until getting into the 21st century, and they more took on two specific distinct spaces. There was not a great shift, my goodness. They didn't swap sides. Much more complicated than that, as national took much more precedent over local. But let's be honest with the fact that we have problems. I didn't look too far into it, but I just saw, I think it was yesterday, that defending or removing gay marriage, aka defending biblical marriage, was removed from the Iowa GOP. Things are radically shifting. We've seen radical shifts on abortion. The party itself has never truly stood up for its stated values when it comes to abortion, but we're seeing it become more and more acceptable to just be kind of open about the fact that you don't want to get rid of abortion. Before it was kind of like you could hold that position, but you had to kind of be like, oh no, we don't like abortion. Now it's getting okay to say, yeah, we want these exceptions. Yeah, we only want to ban it after 13 weeks. Hey, we want it just to be people's choice. My goodness, these are Democrat talking points from the 90s. Sometimes even later than the 90s. My goodness, we've got a problem. And the DSA shows us a strategy for pulling things back. If we want to make the Republican Party more conservative. Now, I will be upfront with things. My personal opinion is we need to, there is no saving the Republican Party. We need to ban the Republican Party. But I do think the best strategy, whether you think it can be turned around, whether you think we need a new party, that's kind of a moot point for phase one. Phase one is learn from something like the DSA to go, okay, we run legitimate conservative Christian candidates as Republicans and get them in office. This is what happened recently in Oklahoma with Dusty Devers, a candidate that was unashamedly Christian and unashamedly abolitionist when it comes to abortion, among other issues. He touched on many hot button topics, and it shows you that there's a way to do it, but there also needs to be organization for that. And again, the DSA shows the difference between individual candidates finding an issue, latching onto it, and attempting to run based on that issue, and organization. Organization is what they do. Organization is their big thing. And they put a lot into their tactics, a lot into their organization. And it's how this tiny party, they have less than 100,000 official members. Less than 100,000 official members. A party of less than 100,000 has 5 people in Congress and has 54 seats across states, across state legislatures, and then more lower level offices as well. How do they do that? How do they get away with that? They leverage things correctly. They leverage movements. They leverage issues. They create unity. They want to be wherever there is some sort of movement going on, wherever there's something that they can subvert to then pull to their ideology. They're there. They're there. They've got the mobilization. They've got the passion. They've got they've got strategy. And what is one of the things that AOC said about her campaign? Because she was running up against the King of Queens. She was running up against just as entrenched as you could get of a politician that had big money behind him. And then she not only beat him, but then she's defended that seat continuously. It's still shocking to me. It's shocking to me that she ever got elected. Shocking to me that she's got repeat elections. But she said that you can't really beat big money with more money. You have to beat them with a totally different game. And she's right. 100% right. Again, we can look at the campaign of Dusty Devers. Maybe if we can get him on here, we'll talk about that. We'll have him talk about that. How do you run a grassroots, low money campaign against more established candidates? How do you run a campaign on principles and values and not strictly on politics and party? How do you do that? Because AOC is 100% right. And we might look at her as conservatives, we might look at her from distance and scratch our head and go, how? There's so many things about her that do not make sense. They do not make sense. But she got elected because she knew how to leverage things. I was reading up on this, and she's, at least her team, but frankly, honestly, seems to be her too, really smart, or probably more clever she says really, really dumb things. She can be completely hypocritical. But it doesn't matter. One, it doesn't matter for her worldview because truth and consistency don't exist. So she's being consistently inconsistent. But when it comes to strategy, leveraging movements, and advancing the ball, her and her team know how to get it done. And they very intentional with everything they did when it comes to just the simple designs of campaign advertisements, posters, slogans, very minute color choices, style choices. They were modeling their posters off of historic revolutionary posters, not Revolutionary War, like Marxist revolutionaries. Very open about things, very passionate, very going where people are, and like leveraging existing tensions, existing movements, existing protests, existing whatever it is. It's why you see these people always. And the DSA, their elected officials are always, if there's something being protested, they are there. They are there, very intentionally so. I mean, right now, they are huge, 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 huge Hamas supporters. Huge on the student movements on campuses. They've got an article out, Solidarity with Student Movement and the Gaza Solidarity Encampments. DSA stand wavering solidarity with the students across Columbia, Yale, NYU, so on and so forth. Now you might go, oh yeah, well of course they're going to do that. That's just part of their woke ideology, their Marxist ideology. But it goes beyond that. That is a recruiting program for them. Over the past decade, their average age has dropped from the 60s down to the low 30s. Not only are they're not a primarily millennial organization, they're a primarily Gen Z organization. That's impressive. Their ability to shift things, to find these movements and pull these people and recruit them and then replicate is amazing. I live in a college town, and I was curious, and I went and yep, they're heavily involved in organizing Hamas protests, anti-Israel protests, and they're using that as specifically as a recruiting tool. They don't want you to just protest that one thing. They want to leverage that, pull you into the rest of these. Well, if you're protesting that, you have to protest this as well, because it's the same thing. Ooh, what's happening over here? So they using that to recruit people into an ideological system, and then using that ideological system to go, well, here's the solution. The solution is socialism. The solution is Marxism. And yeah, again, that's going on just down the road from me. Now, it seems that the scale of protests here are kind of pathetic, but that's what happens when you're in Idaho. Our universities are not exactly conservative either, but for some reason, it's a little different in Idaho. But it's fascinating. We support the righteous message of protesters at the encampments. We call on all our comrades to support efforts nationwide to force universities to divest from the Zionist occupation and call on the United States government to cease aid to Israel. Where protests appear will appear in numbers. They're telling you their strategy. They're not just saying we stand in solidarity. They're telling you their strategy. Where protests appear will appear in numbers. Where repression looms will show up and protest the whole. Where support is needed will be a support. As socialists, we must not lose sight of our fight for the urgent stop to the genocide in Gaza and the liberation of Palestine, from the river to the sea. Just kind of call for an end to genocide and then casually immediately call for a genocide. This stuff is ridiculous, but you might read this and go, they're just dumb. They don't know what they're saying. No, the people that are crafting this is coming from the actual leadership side of things. They know what they're saying. They know what they're saying. They know what they want, and they know what they're doing. That should scare you a little bit. We commend the student movement on reigniting the streets. I'm so concerned what reigniting the streets is supposed to mean. And we will fight by their side, shoulder to shoulder, to force all our institutions to divest from the Zionist, settler, colonial projects. Buzzword, 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 buzzword. And then at the bottom, they tell you to know your local laws and follow them, which is really funny. But it's just to show you that they're successful. They've found a way to subvert the system, to subvert the two-party system, and to start to grow. Not just to grow people ideologically, because there are a lot of Marxists in the Democratic Party. But the DSA has definitely been a huge part of the current push to really make it a Marxist party. Part of the push that has really radically shifted the party. They were already radical, and now it's gone to an extreme. Now, the phrase democratic socialism, you might go, oh yeah, I know a guy who talked about democratic socialism and kind of popularized it. Well, yeah. Would you be surprised to know that he's connected to the DSA? And that's what I'm talking about when I say that there's a senator. He's not officially, he's like officially, unofficially a member. It's kind of weird. He was run as their candidate in 2016 and 2020. Talking about Bernie Sanders. He was run as their candidate. He was run, for them, and it was very intentional to run him as a Democrat. But then he's sort of not officially part of the party at the same time. It's kind of a have your cake, eat it too type thing. And it allows him to keep his supposed I'm an independent, but he never has been. He's a member of, even a founder of political parties. But let's read a little bit. So this is the DSA talking about their history, modern history in particular, Bernie and beyond. And this is talking about their strategic shift to the strategy we've been talking about this whole time. And this is them talking about that, them shifting to this strategy. The leveling off of organizational growth in the 2000s would all change with DSA's decision in late 2014 to make its number one priority the movement to support Bernie Sanders running for president. DSA took the position that for maximum exposure and effectiveness, Sanders should not only run, but should run in the Democratic primaries. So again, this is going on. DSA is deciding to run Bernie. DSA is strategizing, and then DSA puts forward running him as a Democrat. And that advice proved to be spot on. We started out with a coordinated We Need Bernie campaign that had DSA urging Bernie to run, and then shifted to People's Revolution 101 DSA-sponsored teach-ins that introduced Bernie activists to basic democratic socialist programs. As a result, DSA grew healthily through the Sanders campaign, and it just talks about their growth during that time. There's some fascinating things in here. DSA made clear that Bernie's New Deal or social democratic program did not fulfill the socialistic aim of establishing worker or socially social ownership of the economy. But so yeah, they're saying we're 100, we're not democratic socialists. We're 100% socialists. But in the context of 40 years of oligarchic rule, Sanders' program proved sufficiently radical and inspiring. Sanders made clear that he opposed state ownership of corporations, but no mainstream. Listen to this. Listen to this. Sanders made clear that he opposed state ownership of corporations. Oh, so he's opposed to socialism. But no mainstream reporter was astute enough. They're literally saying, hey, you guys are so dumb, you'll eat up whatever we say. No mainstream reporter was astute enough to know that the particular socialist tradition that Sanders came out of favored worker, not state ownership of most firms. Now, in the end, what's the difference? Because the state's going to own it. Either way, there's never actual worker ownership. In capitalism, there can be. Not in socialism. DSA also worked in the campaign to reach out to organizations rooted in communities of color and to feminists, as those were the two constituencies most needed to broaden out Bernie's base among millennials and white working class Democratic primary voters. And then it goes on, and it talks just about so many things about how they were able to really leverage Bernie, leverage this strategy of subverting the Democratic ticket to grow. And that's where they ushered in their wave of growth. They've been relatively steadily growing. Now, they've actually been growing slower under Biden. This is a very fascinating thing. Because they need outrage and protests and all these things. They need to leverage those movements to grow. When someone like Biden is in office, it slows them down. It slows them down. They need the outrage of Orange Man to advance things. And I guarantee you this. When Trump gets reelected, we are going to see a radical expansion of the DSA. We're going to see a radical Marxist shift in the Democrats, like to a degree, in a way that we have not yet seen. And we're also going to see the Republican Party shift an equal degree to the left as they try and eat up the middle, as they try and appeal to the now disenfranchised liberal voters who've been pushed out by the progressives and Marxists. Guarantee you, this is what their strategy is. They've laid out so much of it already. They tell you what they do. That's what's going to happen. If we do not have movements to resist that, to pull the Republican Party, at least in the short term, pull it back in a conservative direction, and in particular, I'd say prepare ourselves to cut them loose, to be the soft liberal party that they've become, where we have an actually truly conservative party. I think if we're not ready to do something like that, these people in particular, the DSA, the Marxists, the openly Marxist people, are going to destroy us. You want to be afraid of Biden? Don't be afraid of Biden. Be afraid of what's beyond Biden. These are the people that are beyond Biden. And they're winning. They're winning. They are a fraction of the size. I think the Libertarian Party in the United States, the party membership is like 700,000. And then they usually get a decent amount more votes than that. Yet a party that is less than a seventh the size. I think they're about a tenth the size. I think their membership is somewhere between 70 to 90,000. So at least a seventh the size is exponentially more successful at getting people into office at high levels. Are there any libertarians? I mean, there might be some people that are ideologically libertarian, a little bit of a different thing there. Because the Libertarian Party is not exactly truly libertarian anymore, but that's a whole nother how liberals subverted the Libertarian Party. But there's a lot of subversion going on. But the DSA has been successful where a larger party hasn't been able to. And they're going to just continue to grow in success. What are some other ways that they're successful? Well, Bernie is a big thing. And his status as kind of an outsider, as an independent, helps advance that. Except for when they want to subvert things and they push him out as a Democrat. But then he's also a member of and founder of the Vermont Progressives, another Marxist party in Vermont. A shockingly successful party in Vermont, especially around the Burlington area, where Bernie's from. Bernie founded it. Bernie was mayor. Bernie got his rise. Bernie started his cult. It's fascinating. And it changed their name over time and blah, 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 but fascinating. But again, Bernie Sanders is part of that. So Bernie Sanders is a part of two Marxist parties. Yet if you ask any average person, they're either going to say he's a Democrat, functionally a Democrat, or he's an independent. They do these things intentionally. But none of this is hidden. You could go and they're open about all of it. They're very open. We could have read so much more, but they're very open about the way they subvert things. Now, you know what else Bernie started? He founded the Congressional Progressive Caucus. You want to go find where the Marxists are, just look at the Progressive Caucus. Congressional Progressive Caucus, founded by Bernie. And few others, but Bernie. So, founder and the first chair of it for the first 9 years, was Bernie. Oh, he's an independent. No, he's not. They have 96 members of the House and then one member of the Senate. Again, Bernie. 96 members of the House. This, again, it goes into the subversion, the DSA subversion. Obviously, all the DSA members are members of the Progressive Caucus. Founder is an openly Marxist man. They're using things like this to shift things to their side. And they're successful. 96 members. And that's been going up quite a bit. If we go back a decade ago. Oh, sorry. I think they actually might have more than 96 at this point. Because I think that's a 2020 number that I just read. And I don't know. I'd have to double check 2022, which I believe they did gain. But you go back 10 years, go back to 2014, they had 68 members of the House and Bernie. 68. And now they're pushing on 100. And yes, it does look like it looks like they are at 100. Which is almost, there are 213 Democrats right now in the House. Or did one leave? Sorry, I'd have to grab the... Anyway, they're representing about 40% of Democrat House members at this point. That's shocking. They have been successful. The DSA, the Democratic Socialists, that's how successful they've been. They've been so successful that they've got their own party members in, but beyond that, they started a progressive radical progressive Marxist organization within the Democrats that has now shifted almost half of the House Democrats to them. Why? Okay, why? Why can we not do the same thing as conservatives? Why? Why are we letting the neocons just trash on true conservatives? Why? I hear people, we have to support the Republican candidate because we can't lose to one of the Democrats. Then start being organized. We need to take advantage of some of the strategies that they've shown to us. Because if we don't start doing something, they're going to absolutely destroy us. They're showing that they're winning and they're growing. Are true conservatives winning and growing? No, we're losing more and more. We're losing more and more. And we're letting Marxists just run away with it. Again, how many of you knew, how many of you realized that there were actual Marxist Party members, Democratic Socialist America, in office on a federal level? How many of you knew that? Yeah, you probably knew that AOC was a Marxist. It's not hard to tell. She's not exactly subtle about that. How many realize that there's actually a political party behind that? Been very efficient. Been doing a great job of subverting things. We have to do better. We also have to be aware of these things. We have to know what they're doing. If we want to be able to defeat them, we got to know their tactics. Now you know this is a crash course. This is super, super basic level. But with all that said, now you got just the basic understanding. We're going to do further episodes, especially as Sam gets a little bit settled into all the different new things in his life, and he's able to start joining us a little bit more again. Me and him are going to have some great conversations. We're going to take you through some history. Again, show you facts, figures, information. You can verify yourself on these sorts of things, give you the history of kind of how we got here. Because there's a lot of things that are just out in the open that I don't think, well, not just I don't think, that most people don't realize. But let's talk about state constitutions. And we're going to talk, this is from the Washington State Constitution. Yeah, Washington State. We're going to Washington State, and we're going to find some beautiful, beautiful gems. And it's going to show that people understood when our states were set up, people understood certain things, certain problems and pitfalls, and they put things in place to prevent them. And both sides, unfortunately, have just decided to not care. And I will talk about what I mean by both sides, because one side has just, let's just ignore that and subvert that. And the other side's basically gone, we're not going to fight it. But let's read from Article 1, Section 1, Political Power. All political power is inherent in the people. Not to the people, in the people. Where does it reside? It resides in the people. All political power is inherent in the people, and governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. People really do not understand any of that anymore. And are established to, so governments are established to protect and maintain individual rights. It lays out the purpose of government and thus its limitations. What does it do? It doesn't establish rights. It only protects and maintains individual rights. All it can do is acknowledge rights. It cannot grant them. Great way to start your Constitution, by the way. But let's go ahead and read two more sections. And you'll start to see some things, especially keep in mind what we just read. So, Section 5 from Article 1. Freedom of speech. Now, if you've never read a state constitution, they're awesome. Absolutely awesome. And they will all reiterate most of the points from the Bill of Rights for very good reason. They're usually more specific too, because states are, by nature of their design, meant to be more specific. But Section 5, freedom of speech. Every person may freely speak, write, and publish on all subjects, being responsible for the abuse of that right. You are able, you have the freedom to speak, write, or publish whatever you want, but there is an abuse of that right, and you are responsible for that. Now, there's caveat. What does that mean? I don't think in context it means necessarily that the government is allowed to censor you. Well, obviously, the government's not allowed to censor you, but, and you might jump to the whole, well, you can't yell fire in a crowded. There's problems with that, but I think it's going on a more personal level, personal responsibility. AKA, you can do or say what you want, but if someone decides to punch you in the face for saying something to them, the government's not your nanny. But I'm not 100% on all the nuances, especially because if you learn the history of free speech and what they meant and what we meant and all these things, there's a lot there. It's fascinating. Section 12. This is the really important one. The last one was more just a curiosity. I love the addition of being responsible for that abuse of that right. We have rights. You can abuse your rights. This is going to be very interesting. So this is Section 12 of Article 1. Special privileges and immunities prohibited. This is a good one. No law shall be passed granting to any citizen, class of citizens, or corporation other than municipal privileges or immunities which upon the same terms shall not equally belong to all citizens or corporations. You cannot show favoritism to any specific group, whether that's an individual person, a class of citizens, or a corporation, a business, other than a city, a municipality, a government corporation. What does this mean, and why I say this kind of stomps down on a lot of woke ideas? Well, Marxism needs classes of citizens. Needs it. It needs to categorize people by, quote, class. You are this class. You are that class. You are one part of the oppressor class, or you're part of one of these oppressed classes. What does this mean? It means that, no, per the Washington State Constitution, you can't have none of that. So things like, I don't know, affirmative action is unconstitutional in the state of Washington. Hate crimes, unconstitutional. But the Republicans, they don't pull that out. They don't go, hey, here's the letter of the Washington State Constitution. You can't be doing this. No, because they don't want to step on things like hate crimes, because that's too easily spun as, oh, well, you're promoting hate. But you cannot have a piece of legislation that identifies people by a class and then says this class has special privileges and immunities. Can't. It's unconstitutional. Framers of this Constitution, they knew what they were doing. They knew problems that could arise when we start dividing people. Now, it is unfortunate that though Washington State was much better than so many other states, the ravages of secular humanism based on evolution hit the state as well. and people of different skin colors were treated differently. Again, not to the same level as other states, but it did happen. It's very unfortunate, but that's what happens when you let in godless ideas. Oh, but it's the slave trade before that. Okay, we're not going down that rabbit trail right now. But the modern, the 21st century and late 20th century racism was not based on previous classifications and categorizations. It was a product of very hateful ideas that find their roots in evolutionary ideas that were categorizing people, and then Marxist ideas built off that, which took advantage of those categories, and then so on and so forth. But this is fascinating. It doesn't just say that all men are created equal. It doesn't just say that we can't judge people differently. We can't use different weights and measures. It goes way out of its way. No. The state does not have the power to do this. It cannot categorize people and then judge them. It cannot create special privileges or immunities for different classes of people or corporations or individuals. Now, modern Washington state tramples on all three of those points. All three of them. Hooey. But I found this fascinating. This is why it's so important and useful to know your state constitution. So fascinating, important to know your state constitution, especially if we're going to do a conservative version of the DSA, or some of their strategies at least, and start to take things back. We need to know this kind of stuff, because this is where we can score massive victories. This is what happened in Arizona. Oh yeah, this old law technically is still in the books. Okay, I guess that means that abortion's pretty much completely banned now. This is why you gotta know stuff. You gotta know what the laws on the books are. You gotta know the Constitution, your state and the federal Constitution. You gotta know these things because you can use them to your advantage, and we can get so much done, especially so much bad legislation, so much bad judicial precedents just destroyed. When we go, yeah, but here are the laws on the books. You got to rule on those. You got to base your rulings on the constitutions. Here's what they say. Here's all this stuff. Boom. We can make such an impact if we start to take it seriously, if we start to organize. Big thing, organize nationally. Now, I've just more tossed the idea out there. Someone's going to have to take that further. But the biggest thing I wanted to show you was the way that Marxists have been subverting our political system, have been using the two-party system to their advantage. Yeah, a third party has been able to use the two-party system to its advantage. Shocking. Anyway, that is going to be it for this episode. Again, if you found this useful, if you were a little surprised by the fact that there's a third party represented and happens to be a Marxist party, go ahead and share this with someone that may not know that. And when I ask you to share, I'm not saying, hey, take this and put this onto your social media. You could do that. That's fine. That's your prerogative. I'm saying to individually send it to someone who you know this would benefit. If you know that this would benefit them, send it to them specifically. But I hope this has been valuable. I hope this has been useful. I hope you learned a little bit more about the ways that Marxists subvert things. We're going to talk more and more over time about how to counter that. How to counter that. Now, I gave you an idea, something we should be doing. But, and for context, that's not saying like something like the Tea Party movement. It's more than that, and more effective than that. But I hope this has got you thinking. That's the biggest point of this episode, is to get you thinking, to get you to realize that there's been more going on politically than you may have realized. That when some people talk about Marxists in Congress, Not even talking necessarily about strictly ideological ones. They're talking about actual Marxist party members. This stuff is real. It's really going on. Go look up information about the DSA. You don't believe me? Go look it up. They're open about things. In fact, they're shockingly open. But I hope this has been helpful. And remember, you can go to enemieswithinthechurch.com to view the documentary if you haven't already. You can also go to EWTC News to keep more up to date. Now, we're still in sort of I haven't mentioned this, but we're still in sort of a soft launch period with the website. And we've been more collecting some articles right now for getting geared up for a more full official launch. So you might not see too much new stuff right now as we're finishing the gear up for that. But just wanted to let you know on that point. But go to EWTCnews.com. Remember to like and interact with the podcast here. And remember, don't go woke.